Here we're going to discuss the most important events that took place during the previous 12 hours. We have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first we're going to talk about the northern regions of Ukraine, about Chernihiv and Sumy areas. According to information we have, and if you remember, yesterday we noted very huge activity of the armored force of the Russian Federation along the border. We got lots of episodes and lots of videos how the Russians were bombing and attacking positions of the armored force of Ukraine along the border with Chernihiv region and Sumy region. Lots of positions, lots of equipment, lots of vehicles were destroyed by the Russian artillery fire. Obviously, all these videos and all these episodes are telling us about one thing. Ukrainians concentrated a lot of units in this part, probably with the purpose to begin offensive operation deep inside of the territory of Russia during the 9th of May, during the Victory Day and parade in Moscow. Furthermore, today the Russians published lots of videos from this area again, and for example, in this video we can see how the Russians, as a result of reconnaissance operation, managed to discover positions of Ukrainian facilities that Ukrainians use to produce weapons and arms. And as a result of multiple drone strikes, all these facilities were damaged and destroyed. So this is very important video because the Russians, as you can see, are trying to destroy Ukrainian infrastructure in this region with the purpose not to allow them to begin any offensive operation during the 9th of May. But at the same time, we continue receiving lots of very importance from the settlement of Tyotkina. I'll remind you that several days ago we discussed that Ukrainians were concentrating their forces around this pocket, and we came to the conclusion that most likely during the 9th of May and May's holidays, the Ukrainians have plans to cut this salient, to take under control these two settlements, the settlement of Tyotkin and Popovo-Lizachi, and to use this, let's say, victory as a media victory. For example, today several pro-Russian resources made several articles regarding the situation in this region. At the moment, the situation is gradually becoming tense. The armored forces of Ukraine is attempting to strike the settlement of Tyotkina with all weapons. Up to 5 Ukrainian armored forces personnel were detected in the area of the railway station, where there was a firefight, as a result of which the Ukrainians retreated to its territory in the settlement of Rozhivka. So this article reported that the Ukrainians during the previous 12 hours made first attempt to enter the village of Tyotkina, but they were stopped somewhere here, and after firefight the Ukrainians were forced to fall back. So once again, most likely the Ukrainians will try to establish complete control over this pocket and to use this victory as a huge media victory during the 9th of May and parade in Moscow.
Nå nye højder med din airfrying. Med den første staplede airfryer med 2 zoner fra Ninja.
Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the Konstantinovka direction, because from this area once again we got the biggest number of updates, and here we can see the same story as we just discussed in the Sumy and Chernihiv regions. During the previous 24 hours, the Russians mainly were concentrated on attacking Ukrainian facilities, military objects on the territory of the settlements of Kramatorsk, Konstantinovka, and different towns and villages around this area. In this video, according to information we have, the Russians were bombing and attacking positions of the armored forces of Ukraine that are involved in defense operation of Torets, Konstantinovka, and Kliban-Byksky pocket. The Russians reported that as a result of this strike, they managed to deal significant damage. A bit further in the western direction, we have another village by the name of Stepanovka. In this video, we can see almost the same story. The Russians managed to discover positions of the armored forces of Ukraine on the territory of this settlement, and then the Russians began bombing and attacking this territory. The sources reported that Ukrainians suffered huge losses. Another video came to us from the settlement of Raiska, the same story, but as for this area, we can see not just buildings and facilities, we can see lots of armored vehicles and equipment of the armored forces of Ukraine that were deployed in this area. As you can see, this time the Russians were bombing and attacking this territory with cluster rounds. As a result of attack, Ukrainians suffered huge losses. Once again, as you can see, during the previous night, the Russians mainly were attacking Ukrainian positions in this square. So between the settlements Kramatorsk, Slaviansk, Konstantinovka, the Ukrainians use this area for, let's say, concentration purposes. They keep their reserves here, they keep their reinforcements, they have them armor depots, warehouses, with the purpose to bring as soon as possible additional resources to the line of combat contact in the vicinity of the city of Toretsk and in the direction of Kliban-Bykskaya water reservoir. As for the Kliban-Bykskaya water reservoir, as you can see, during the previous 12 hours we received a lot of very important updates and we have changes on the ground. So let's discuss them in details. And first, let's talk about the settlement of Nova Poltavka. During the previous days, we were talking a lot about the situation in this area. A lot of pro-Russian resources reported that the armed forces of the Russian Federation carry out several attacks in the direction of Nova Poltavka, but without any changes on the ground or without any proofs. So during the previous 12 hours, for the first time since the beginning of Russian offensive operation and since the beginning of battle for this company's stronghold, the Ukrainian sources and the Russian sources published first videos from the southern part of the settlement of Nova Poltavka. In this video that was published by the Ukrainian side, we can see Ukrainian FPV drones that were flying above area and attacking Russian units and soldiers in this direction. Lots of episodes, lots of strikes on Russian units. So based on this video, we made changes on the ground. Later we got another video, and this video was published by the Russians. In this video we can see how Russian armored vehicle entered the most southern part of the settlement while the Russian vehicle was attacking Ukrainian positions further in the northern direction. Russian infantry landed in this area and took under control the nearest building. So as for this moment, this episode took place exactly in this point. Russian vehicle was located exactly in this point, and while the Russians were attacking in the northern direction, so the Russians were attacking somewhere there, the Russian units and Russian soldiers took under control buildings that located to the southwest of the Russian vehicle. So we have proofs that the Russians established complete control over the southern part, and most likely during the previous 24 hours the Russians continue advancing in the northern direction with the purpose to establish complete control over this territory. We are waiting for additional updates. Obviously this is a very important situation. Furthermore, according to information we have and according to geolocations, to this big number of geolocations, we see that the Russians established complete FPV drone control over this territory. Now we see and we understand that most likely the Russians are trying to establish complete control over the settlement of Alexandropol, and the Russians are doing everything they can with the purpose not to allow the Ukrainians to bring additional forces and reinforcements from the settlement of Zarya in the direction of Alexandropol with the purpose to stabilize the situation, because everything that comes in this area the Russians destroy it immediately. We have a lot of proofs and we have a lot of videos where we can see this. For example, in this video we can see how the Russians were destroying Ukrainian drones above this area, trying to secure this territory and to secure the pass for the Russian infantry and soldiers. In this video we can see how the Russians were attacking Ukrainian soldiers that were moving in the direction of Alexandropol under very heavy fire of Russian drones. As for now, we see that the Russians still haven't managed to establish complete control over the settlement of Alexandropol, but due to complete probably control over this territory and complete superiority of the armored forces of the Russian in this direction, we expect that this territory would be taken by the Russians in the very near future and probably during the next 24 hours. At the same time, the Russians continue assault operation in the village by the name of Nova Olenivka. I'll remind you that several days ago the Russians established complete control over the southern part, and just after 2 days of complete silence we start receiving updates and geolocations that confirm that the Russians are trying to move further in the northern direction. The Russian sources published this video where we can see lots of strikes, very heavy clashes, and attempts to clear the northern part of the settlement with the purpose to ease the progress on the ground of the armored forces of the Russian Federation. While the Russians are trying to fight for the western flank of the Kliban-Bykskaya pocket, we see that the Russians intensified and resumed their activities in the most southern part of this pocket as well. Several sources reported that the southern pocket of this Kliban-Bykskaya pocket was completely cut by the Russians, and we have video that confirm this. In this video we can see how Ukrainians were attacking Russian units in this part of the pocket, and based on this video we have adjusted the map by coloring additional territories under complete Russian control. So based on this video, based on the entire picture in this area, we see that currently the Russians are trying to cut the salient between the settlements of Gnatovka, Tarasovka, Zelenoye Polye and Kalinovo. So this will allow the Russians to shorten the lines, to release additional units that could be used somewhere else on other direction with the purpose to increase the pressure on the positions of the armored forces of Ukraine.
Husqvarna, verdens førende inden for robotplæneklippere.
Very important updates and very important details are coming from the settlement of Shcherbynovka and the settlement of Novospassky. As you can see, there are a lots of icons exactly in this area. There are very heavy clashes right now. We have lots of videos that were published both by the Russians and by the Ukrainians, and based on both videos, we came to the conclusion that currently the Russians are trying to establish complete control over these pockets and to take everything under complete control in the territory of the village of Shcherbynovka and Novospassky. So first, let's take a look at Ukrainian video. In this video, we can see how Russian motorbikers were attacking Ukrainian positions using lots of troopers, lots of motorcycles. The Russians were moving from the south in the northern direction. This video had a lot of episodes with violence. This video was published by the 12th Special Purpose Brigade Azov. As a result of this attack, we managed to geolocate several positions of the armored forces of the Russian Federation, and we have adjusted the map. So based on this video, as you can see, we have colored the most southern part of the settlement of Novospassky. So, but according to all these geolocations, we believe that the Russians were stopped and they haven't managed to move further in the northern direction. At the same time, the Russian sources published video from their side where we can see how the Russians were bombing and attacking positions of the armored forces of Ukraine in the central part of the settlement of Novospassky, trying to clear this area and secure the zone for the Russian troopers that were moving in this area. So once again, based on these two videos, we see that there are very heavy clashes for this territory, and we expect that currently the Russians are focused on establishing complete control over the territory of the village by the name of Novospassky that is located on the, let's say, western bank of the river of Krivoy Tarets. As for the settlement of Shcherbynovka, most likely the Russians will try to keep this area for as long as possible, because if they can take under control this settlement, then the settlement of Shcherbynovka could be caught in cauldron by the Russians and the Ukrainians would be forced to fall back. So we see that the Russians intensifying their activities and Russian offensive operation is gaining momentum. Now let's talk about the Pokrovsk direction. As you can see, we have lots of icons from this area as well. The sources reported that during the previous 12 hours, different sources managed to discover lots of fire anomalies in this area, which means that the Russians are intensifying their attacks as well. But as for now, all these artillery strikes have just one purpose: to distract Ukrainian attention, while the main Russian forces are trying to establish complete control over the settlement of Udachne, to get as close as possible to the facilities to the north of Udachne, and to improve their positions of the armored forces of the Russian Federation along the railways in the direction of the city of Pokrovsk. So the situation in this area is very difficult for Ukrainians. As for now, the Ukrainians are holding their lines, but we can't tell for sure whether the Ukrainians are able to do this for a very long period of time. We see that the Russians are increasing their pressure because they are very close to the border between Dnipro and Donetsk region, and obviously they are planning to take control over this border in the very near future. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the South Donetsk direction. If you remember, yesterday we discussed that the Russians are planning to attack the settlement of Zelene Polye from the east, and we had lots of proofs that confirmed this information. We have lots of changes on the ground, we had lots of strikes, artillery preparation, and today we got another video where we can see how the Russians were attacking the settlement of Zelene Polye from the east. This video was published by the 31st Brigade of the Armored Forces of Ukraine, and in this video we can see how Ukrainians of 31st Brigade were trying to stop and to slow down the Russians during their offensive operation with the use of the significant number of vehicles, tanks and motorcycles in the direction of Zelene Polye. The Ukrainians were bombing and attacking the Russians. Several videos, several moments were geolocated from this video, and we have adjusted the map. So according to information we have, the Russians improved their positions in these three lines. So this is the situation in the area. The Russians managed to outflank the western part of the settlement of Novoselka from the north, we can see, and the Russians managed to improve their positions on the territory of Volne Polye. So summarizing everything, we see that the Russians currently are trying to advance using these roads of attack, the Russians are advancing using these roads of attack, and the Russians are trying to improve their positions using these roads of attack. So very broad frontline attack with the purpose at the end to get as close as possible and to establish complete control over 3 settlements, Novoselka, Zelene Polye, and Novopol, and to take everything to the east of this, let's say, red line under complete control, which will allow the Russians to enter operational space, and then the Russians will have lots of fields and lots of options for maneuvers.